Alright, my name is Darren Reedus, and today I'm going to be discussing if people can really be brainwashed or not. I chose this topic because I thought it was interesting, and I also I wanted to see the support behind like the yes and no reasoning behind it. My first article is a position piece by Solomon done in 1983. It's called Programming and Deprogramming the Moonies, Social Psychology Applied. So Solomon looks at brainwashing, and she says that it can be done, and it's been done before, and she uses isolation, group peer pressure, which is pretty much like social influence, and cohesion to describe her claims about it. So isolation is removing someone from their past environments. And the Unification Church, she uses Unification Church to support each of her claims about brainwashing. So the Unification Church isolates its converts and recruits. So by doing that, the converts can't hear any negative influence about the Moon movement. So without that outside influence, which ties right into group and peer pressure, they're not allowed to think for themselves, which I'll get into later with my next article. So for group pressure, the Unification Church, they would form special bonds with their converts and recruits. Again, not letting influence from the outside. In this regard, it's people, not letting them change their minds on it. And cohesion is the use of force to abide by behaviors and things like that. So the Unification Church denies the use of coercive tactics, but the people that were supposedly brainwashed, it's hard to believe that there was something else, that there wasn't an outside influence, controlling them. My second article is a position piece by Richardson in 1993. This is actually a counter argument to the very first article. So this is my first no argument. This is called A Social Psychological Critique of Brainwashing, Claims About Recruitment to New Religions. So in this article, he looks at what Solomon said in the first article, isolation, group pressure, and cohesion, and he makes an argument to each one of those things. So he says that Marine boot camps and juvenile detention centers, they use the same isolation techniques that the Unification Church did, and obviously these people did not come out brainwashed, and many of them returned actually. In this argument to group pressure, there was no time for personal reflection. So when you're for group pressure, the social influence, if you don't have time for personal reflection, then it can't be considered brainwashing. In his argument to cohesion, he said that it's ineffective because once the coercive behaviors have stopped, people often they revert back to their their normal behavior, and even backlash comes from cohesion, and I'll get into that with my other no articles. Okay, my next article is a position piece by Wakefield done in 1991. It's called Brainwashing and Thought Control in Scientology. So Wakefield describes brainwashing as the process of causing a person to undergo a radical alteration of beliefs and attitudes. Her claims about brainwashing are consistent with Solomon's in the first article. So she says by isolation, social influence, and coercive techniques, along with food and sleep deprivation, that people can become brainwashed. She said that it first originated in the Korean War, Russia and North Korea, and that it's most common today. In that time it was 1991. She said that it's most common with cults because they provide young people that are looking for an identity. Cults, I guess, in this time would provide the reassuring answers that they needed to the questions in their life. So, like, if they were to have like a life experience like a divorce or a bad breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, then these cults would provide the reassurance that they needed. Okay. For my no articles, it was very, very difficult to find any. So I took the examples, the brainwashing techniques. So isolation, social influence, and coercive tactics, and food and sleep deprivation. I took those examples and I took those techniques and looked for examples of when those were applied and it didn't cause the person to be brainwashed. So my first one, is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. This was two Jewish resistance groups, the ZOB and ZZW. They first attacked the Germans on January 18, 1943. Civilians of the ghetto pitched in as well because from the first battle they saw, it lasted about 4 days. They didn't win, but they saw that the Germans were weak in some places and that, an uprising was possible. So they spent that time from January until April training, and civilians, they helped out by building underground bunkers and rooftops for the people to escape to, because they couldn't just face the Germans, they had to use guerrilla warfare. So on April 19th, they had their attack, and it was successful. And it was successful to a point where the Germans had to, they had to eventually burn down the entire ghetto to weed out the fighters because they would go off and hide. So by May 8th, the German military ended the operation. So the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and slavery and Harriet Tubman, these are two examples of how those techniques are applied and they don't result in brainwashing. So Harriet Tubman was born a slave in Bufftown, Maryland, 1820. She escaped in 1849 and shortly after made her first trip back after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was passed. That made it illegal to pick up runaway slaves. And after 7 years, 19 trips, and 300 rescued slaves, she was never caught, never lost a slave, and never let any slave turn back. So these articles, Harriet Tubman and slavery and the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, you see that like the Jewish people and with slavery, black people, they were isolated from their environment. They were influenced socially, obviously, by the oppressive people, and forced coercive tactics. They used force to get their message across. And from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, obviously these people they didn't submit to it. And with slavery and Harriet Tubman, obviously that didn't work as well. So my opinion is that people cannot be brainwashed, and because I believe just that the supports for the no side of it, they just outweigh the positive. And are there any comments, questions?